This is the third week in Advent. And so often, as our progression through Advent happens, we focus on baby Jesus. I mean, it's an easy thing to focus on. It's love, it's joy, it's innocence, it's all those things we associate with Christmas. But Advent is not just about waiting for what goes on in the manger, Christmas Eve. Advent is also a journey of being prepared, of being aware, of being awake. In the podcast that will be appearing on December 15th of this year, Deb asks me the question, why is that the focus rather than kind of digging around in the scripture? And without even thinking, I said something along the lines of, because it's easy, because clergy and preachers are tired by the time it gets here, and also when we've got a whole lot of people coming just for Christmas, it's not enough time to really delve into some of the stuff going on. But we need to spend time looking a little deeper at the scripture and about what's going on. I once told someone that Easter morning was was Mary Magdalene's story as much as it was Jesus' story. And a person went absolutely berserk on me that it was all about Jesus. Well, the thing is, the Bible is never all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus and the people who heard the message and did the work and shared what they understood and eventually led to this faith that we have. Advent is as much the story of John the Baptist as it is the story of Jesus. And this is our second week looking at John the Baptist. The pattern of Advent, as I pointed out before, the first week is the apocalyptic reading about the basis of hope. The second week is getting to know John the Baptist. The third week is about his ministry, what he did before Jesus became the focus. And the fourth is when we meet Mary and Joseph, which is the podcast on the 15th. It kind of spreads it out and fills it out a little bit more. This is the week we look at John the Baptist and what happened. Now, we're in Matthew. So again, Matthew means we are connecting with the Hebrew scriptures. And we have a quote from Malachi chapter 3 in the scripture we're looking at today. John the Baptist is in prison. We have jumped from his baptizing of Jesus in the early part of the book of Matthew to chapter 11. So we have jumped over the Beatitudes, we have jumped over the Sermon on the Mount, we have jumped over a lot of Jesus' ministry. And John is stuck in prison, probably going absolutely crazy. And the reason that is because he understood who the Messiah was supposed to be, and Jesus isn't doing that. Imagine your entire life dedicated, absolutely convinced that you know what is going on, and preparing everybody for this person, and that person you prepared them for is gone off script. They are doing their own thing. And here we have John locked away, absolutely frantic, trying to figure out what is going on. Was he wrong? Did he pick the wrong person? Was he not the person that John had been talking about, that John had baptized, that he actually made a mistake? That's what's going on for John in today's lesson. So John sends his messenger to Jesus. And Jesus by now has got a reputation of his own. He's gone long past the person who John met in person during the baptism. He's into a ministry of his own. He's into angering authorities all on his own. He's not following the ministry that John thought he was lying out. And so the messenger comes to Jesus and says, John wants to know if you are the one, if you are the Messiah. Now, we have to stop there for a second, because in order to answer that question, we have to understand who John thought the Messiah was going to be, and who Matthew showed John to understand as the Messiah. Matthew, of course, quoting from all of these prophets as he lines up how Jesus is going to be perceived. We saw last week quoting from Isaiah as the return from Persia of the Judeans that have been in captive in Babylonia, and the rebuilding of the temple, the building of the second temple. This week, our scripture is from Malachi, which has a lot of the same tones. Malachi was written far after the return and the restoration, essentially, of Judea, written at a time where military might, the Persians, overwhelmed the Babylonians and freed them. that the Persians, even though they were over top of overseeing the land of Palestine, were not involved in the daily goings on. They let the Hebrew people do what they were supposed to do. And then the Greeks are involved afterwards, and eventually the Romans take over. But there's this sense of military might will make right that is influencing how John saw the Messiah. He was waiting for the military commander to come in, the one who was going to brook no favors, the one who was going to tell people how it's at, the one who was going to raise armies and get them done and get the freedom back for the land of Palestine. That's not who Jesus turned out to be. So now John is wondering, did he make a mistake? So the servant comes to Jesus while Jesus is teaching and asks Jesus straight out, are you the one we're waiting for? Now, in a very interesting exchange, because if you look at any of the Gospels, all four of them, when Jesus is asked a question, he usually deflects or turns it back on the asker or points to something else that Jesus saw as the real question, but not necessarily the question that was asked. He doesn't do any of that with the messenger from John. The messenger asks the questions and Jesus answers him plainly and immediately. Jesus shows a lot of respect for John and John's ministry and how John prepared the way for him. And he tells him, go tell John, the lame are being made well, the blind are being made to see, peace is coming. All the things that were promised, all the expectations are being met. They're not being met, obviously, in the manner that John the Baptist was expecting, but they are being met. And that was the message that Jesus wanted the messenger to take back to John. You did your job, good and faithful servant. You set the stage. What I do can now happen because of what you did. You were not wrong. You had the complete understanding. You knew what you were about. It must have been so comforting for John in prison to hear that he was not wrong. He still didn't necessarily agree with the method, but he knew that ultimately the message is beyond him. Now, meanwhile, Jesus is staying with the people who are watching this exchange between the prophets, and he whips on them. If you've ever had that experience of having this energy kind of pumping, it's like, this is a really important question. I am being asked to basically acknowledge my job, my power, the changes I'm trying to make, maybe before I'm ready to do that. That was the Jesus situation. And he turns on the people who are basically an audience with him and John's messenger and says, what were you expecting? What were you looking for when you came out to the desert? And he challenges them. And he says, did you expect something nice and warm and fuzzy? Did you expect soft robes? Because the only soft robes, they're in the palace and the temple. They're not here. This is not a comfortable journey. And the amount of challenge that Jesus issues at these people feels so out of character with the Advent we seem to be part of, where this gentle walk towards a cradle is taking place. But the thing is, Jesus is showing us that walk to the cradle is just one part of the picture. If we celebrate Jesus' birth year after year after year, then we have to celebrate year 3 year after year after year, year 10 year after year after year, year 30 year after year after year, because Jesus' ministry continues and Jesus is trying to get at the point with these folks. Yeah, the military thing, not so much, but that does not preclude him from challenging the system in other ways. Challenging the system in gentler ways that may not even have been contemplated before. Really making people ask the questions, what are they looking for? Where are their values? What is going on? These are people who had celebrated John the Baptist. The reason John the Baptist was in prison and not automatically killed was because Herod was a little bit afraid of him. In fact, he doesn't even get killed until, a couple more chapters later, when Herod's wife, Herodosia, tricks Herod into killing him and displaying his head on a platter. John is somehow protected even by Herod, who is scared of what John is predicting. Jesus didn't have that kind of protection. He did things differently. He wasn't the military power and might and force that was so easily understood both by John and Herod, but also by the people waiting for liberation. They were not clear on what Jesus meant, and so he wanted to clear it up for them. And he said, quoting Malachi, that person, John the Baptist, he was the front runner. He was coming to prepare the way. But that preparing of the way was a military process. That's actually what the language reads. Military process where people were not going to be comfortable, where they're going to be challenged to look to see where they stand. If they have to change, if they are going to fade away, if they're going to survive what is to come, if they're going to totally crumble and pass away. That's all the stuff that they had to do that John the Baptist prepared them for. Are they still ready to follow John the Baptist? Because at no point in time does Jesus say John's point is not accurate. His methodology might be different, but the point is still the point, that this is change coming, that God's kingdom is coming, that we have to do something about it, and it is meant to be uncomfortable, and it is meant to make us think, and it is meant to be the focus, not just the manger and the child and the soft music on Christmas Eve. This coming, this Advent that we're preparing for, is turning the world upside down. Nothing will be the same again. And Jesus tells these folks, no matter how amazing John the Baptist was, and he was amazing, the people who are in the next world, in the new heaven, in the new existence, the least of these are even better than John. Now, what do you do with that except stay disquieted? Preparing our way as a faith community is not a soft ride. It is challenging. And that's what Advent calls us to do. Really, really challenge who we believe we are waiting for, how we are going to receive the new messenger, how we are going to understand incarnation, God who is fully human and fully God. How any of that is going to work for us. And it is so much more complicated and meaningful than just simply waiting for the baby to be placed in a manger.